Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 259 of Retropower Uncut. I'm going to start by the E-Type, but we're going to be quite quick on the E-Type because the bits that are being done are not that exciting, if I'm honest. It's all the little trivial little bits which take lots of time and lots of patience, but are not particularly photogenic. So the first step that Scott has been doing this week is a revisit on the exhaust. There was a section of the exhaust that he was, and having looked at it quite rightly, not entirely happy with, where 4 V-band clamps were in close proximity, as well as the chassis rail and the sump. And it meant that there was insufficient space around them, basically. And that with a bit of heating and contraction and shuffling around of things, something was going to hit something else. They weren't hitting as Scott had left them, but they were going to end up hitting. So Scott's now moved the 2 of the 4 V-bands back. So for the outermost pipes, he's moved the V-bands back to the forward end of the first silencers. And those pipes can actually be removed, including that now longer section of pipe from the engine without a problem, which I was surprised by, but it is actually possible. So now 2 of the V-bands are just after the downpipe, 2 of the V-bands are further back at the silencers, and that's divided down the amount of machinery trying to fit in not enough space, which is pretty much most of the work involved in a V12 E-Type, really, is trying to fit too many things in not enough room. But that's helped drastically on the exhaust and improved things markedly. So Scott's redone that, which he's made a nice job of, and now it all fits. He's now working on the mountings for the airboxes and a carrier for some of the plumbing at the front end. The mountings for the airboxes, there was a plan. The plan has now gone out of the window because there was a slight oversight in the plan, namely the removal of the front subframe. The original brackets for the airboxes would have not blocked access to the bolts, but would have blocked the travel of the front subframe during removal, which Scott wisely noticed, which was good, because otherwise we would have had a problem. He spotted that before any welding took place, which is good, and he's now revised those brackets so that now the airboxes are going to bolt directly into the sheet metal of the forward part of the sill, basically, and we're not going to have a welded in bracket there because we can't, because if we weld a bracket in there it'll prevent removal of the front subframe due to the bracket locations on that front subframe. So that's the situation with that. And he's then moved on to making a piece which I can't actually see lying around now, basically an aluminium channel. I'm wondering if it's actually on the car. Ah, it is. He's now moved on to making an aluminium channel, which is going along here. Now, don't worry, this is going to have some punched and swaged holes in this. This isn't going to be a big solid piece of aluminium like this, but we needed to make a carrier for 4 fluid lines that have to run down this side. Now, we could string them haphazardly from the various bits of the subframe. We don't want to put a whole myriad of holes into the subframe parts. We'd rather constrain it to 2 per piece, and we also want to be able to do the job neatly, and also a bit of heat shielding for the fluid lines from the exhaust. So this aluminium panel is going to act as a bit of a heat shield and dissipator. It's going to have holes in to allow airflow through it so that the air can still escape via this past the lines, but also then support all of the 4 lines that are going to travel down here. So it'll look a lot prettier than this once it's finished. But basically it needs to carry 2 power steering lines and 2 auto transmission cooler lines as they travel down here to the power steering pump and to the automatic transmission. So a necessary piece, and that's what the final bit of what Scott's been working on this week on the E-Type is. So at that point I'm going to stop and not waffle on, because they're not particularly exciting parts, and that's that really on that one. Jamie's struggling to reverse here, but we're going to walk past this, which is a relic of Aston Martin, which I brought up yesterday from storage. We'd hung on to it in case we needed to deduce anything from it. I brought it in because we were looking now at the structural area at the end of the front panel and the forward end of the inner wing, and working out what we need to do there and whether there's anything we need to add. But all I've deduced really from looking at this is that it's scrap, and that it will be going in the scrap. Yeah, I haven't really deduced anything other than that it's as agricultural as we remembered it being, and that's it really. So that's enough to be said about that. The only other thing we're going to do is the positioning of these bonnet hinges, which we won't take as gospel from this because it's all bent. But we will be making some new hinges rather than these horrible bent ones, based on a pattern I'll take from these, and we'll use the positioning of these on here as the initial positioning on the new front end, but we will also then do some checking and make sure that is actually the correct position for the bonnet using our shiny new bonnet inner and outer that we picked up from ASR. So on that note, we're going to actually skip onto the Aston next because that ties into that, and we'll come back to the E9. On the Aston, Matt has been working on various parts on the front end. Basically, there was a lot of, I think I mentioned it before, there was some chicken and egg, there was some what bit to do first in terms of how to align all the front end. We worked out a way to muddle through that. We got the inner front panel mounted, you saw that last week. We then needed to get the outer front panel on so we could double check that the back of the inner front panel was in the right place and that we could check everything else fitted. So to that end, Matt did a careful and gradual trimming, checking operation to get the replacement front panel that we got from ASR lined up and screwed in place, which is now done, on the front of the car to make sure everything else lines up, which it does. It actually all lines up really well. We're really happy. Everything's gone well there. So that's now in place, all screwed in position. The inner wing support, well the outer wing, sorry, support tubes, the oval tubes that we've mentioned before are screwed in position, are welded in position to the car and screwed in position to the wings, so they're now holding all of this in place. So this H-frame here that we've got in place, or this goal post here that was supporting the wings, is going to be able to come off actually. The moment it's still on, that will be coming off. But that's things to be done, not things that have been done. Things that have been done, the radiator support area and structure has been built, which is a pair of brackets off the chassis rail extensions each side, which I think you saw this chassis rail extensions being built last week. Matt's now built a pair of brackets that go off each side of those chassis rail extensions to carry the bottom of the radiator, with a punched and swaged top hat section that goes across those two brackets to help support that area, protect the bottom of the radiator and allow any trapped rainwater and mess and muck to fall out of the bottom of that bracket so it doesn't sit in it and corrode it away. So that's that. Matt's now moved on to the side panels that are going to duct the air from the air intake opening on the front to the radiator, and if Jamie pans on towards the bench you'll actually see one over there live and now. That thing with the hole in there is one of the side panels that panels the area from the air intake into the cooler pack. So that's going to close off this side actually, because that one with a hole in, that hole is the air intake. As you can see, Matt's just turning the edge of that hole at the minute because we're going to turn that to a safety edge. That's basically a vent hole that's going to allow the air that is pushed in onto the front of the radiator in there. That generates a high pressure area on the front of the radiator. We've cut a hole in the side that's going to allow that high pressure air to spill out forward of the radiator while it's still nice and cool and fill basically this area in this corner here, which we're going to create a box. Both sides in the front we're going to create a box that basically holds the front of the car together, and also on that side acts as a cold air feed box for the air filter to sit in, which is a bit of cardboard that Jamie's actually nearly leaning on now. I made a very crude cardboard mock-up air filter or Tommy Cooper hat, yeah, made a crude mock-up of an air filter. Did a bit of trawling around online on K&N's website, working out various air filter sizes and establishing what would have enough filter area and fit in the space. The two sort of constraints on that. A filter area I deduced from an original Chevy Camaro, the LT powered Camaro. I've forgotten what the number for it is now, but basically an LT powered, same engine as this, powered Camaro, and also looking at the Corvette with the same power plant. And they have very similar filter areas. off the top of my head, I think it's about 75,000 square millimeters, something like that, for the filter area. So using that as an aim filter area, I then looked around to see what we could actually get into that space. I was initially looking at a panel filter. Panel filter could fit. The closest I could get that fitted into the area that wasn't a funny shape, that was readily available, was actually for a Cummins powered Dodge Ram, which actually fitted quite, it was a nice filter area, but it was quite tight, and we would have been struggling for space to actually get the frame in to hold that filter in place in the space we've got. It would have been very unnecessarily tight on everything. Then I discovered a cone filter, which basically looks like that, which has enough filter area. It actually has more filter area, and it does fit on an angle in that area. It'll miss the issue in the space there is the back shells for both the headlights are quite tight on whatever filter you put in there. But this will, on an angle, will clear. One back shell will sit in past the end of it there, and the other back shell will sit in where it chamfers back there. So the two headlamps will fit either side of it like that. The headlamp back shells, that'll sit nicely in between, and then we'll 3D print an outlet that goes off that through a closure plate, which closes that box in from the back. And that will unbolt together with the filter, but we'll have a spigot through it that connects to the feed pipe that feeds the engine. So quite a neat setup, that'll all work, will fit. So filter's ordered, that's on its way. So yeah, everything should come together quite nicely there. I've also been looking at, as an aside to what Matt's been working on, I've also been looking at the headlamp units and the grille. And discovered another quite good little, here's a little tidbit of amusing information. The indicator units on an Aston DBS are Mark II Cortina. They're borrowed from Ford. Ford Aston Martin crossover. Happened then, it's happened since. Yeah, they were borrowed from Ford. They were Mark II Cortina, and I'd assumed they were standard Mark II Cortina indicator units. It's only when I started to look that I realised that Aston Martin actually modified them. Would you believe, as a production car part, they took a Mark II Cortina indicator unit, sawed the ends off it, sawed a bit off the side of it, and then drilled some new holes in it. And that was the production car part. It did tickle me that a little bit. So I'm going to do the same and get some new old stock Mark II Cortina indicators, and then follow the Aston Martin build manual. And not that there is a build manual that I know of, I'm joking there, but I'm going to saw the ends off, which they did. There's actually a casting line that they've followed with the saw both the top and bottom off the indicator unit, saw the extra screw tab off the side, and there I have a production Aston Martin item made in the original manner. But new, which is good. But we're going to use the original type indicator units. And I wanted to check the fitment of those, because when we build the boxes off the back of the headlamp housings, which are going to form the cold air box that side, and also a housing for somewhere to put a washer tank this side, I wanted to make sure I wasn't causing a problem for the indicator units, which I'm not. That'll all fit fine, but I just thought that ought to be checked in that process. Once Matt's built the sides for that air duct, he's also building into those the brackets which are going to mount the upper part of the cooler pack and stop the radiator jumping out of its mounting pins, which its mounting pins sit at the bottom into that piece I told you about. Then he will also be building a panel that covers over all of the top of this area, covers over the top of the cooler. We'll have a seal that drops in to the top of the radiator to seal the high pressure air onto the front of that, to make sure that's all goes through the radiator nicely, and also covers all of this area in and finishes the forward part of the engine bay, and just looks neat, and somewhere to put a VIN tag, a build tag and things like that. So just a nice neat finisher panel in there. So that's another piece that Matt will be on with making. I think we'll probably do that bit in aluminium though. Further to that, Matt's also done a little bit more work on the front of the chassis. We'd run a little bit tight. We'd made some estimations, and we'd run a little bit tight with the clearance of the steering arm, the inner steering rack ends, and the cutout in the chassis for them. So he's actually just modified that cutout and taken about another ½ an inch or so out of that cutout, just so we've got a bit more clearance on the steering arms, on the track rods, because they were just a little bit tight at full bump on the chassis. And to that end, we've also had the mock-up front wheel, the bobby tool on the front wheel. and fitted the front wheel and looked at clearances and just had a bit of a rough establish of where we need inner wing to be and that sort of thing. Again, very roughly at the moment, it's just establishing where we need to put the flanges between the front end metalwork and where the splash shield part of the inner wing will be. But more on that as you see it. Talking of Bobby, Bobby once again just would like to relay his appreciation for all the messages, and that's very much appreciated on his part and ours. And Bobby's actually been in this week. He popped in for our weekly planning meeting on Tuesday. So Bobby was present for that and popped in to see us. He's got a pretty sore tummy still, as you'd expect. So his car journey wasn't overly pleasant. He's been a bit cautious on that, and he can't drive himself at the moment either, again due to stomach muscles being obviously all cut open. So he's healing up well. He's doing well. He's getting a fair bit of walking in. I think he's kind of walking a couple of miles a day now, trying to keep up with that. And in the next few days, he will be back at the hospital for a consultation on his chemo. So he'll be finding out what they'll be getting a plan together on that. So yeah, that's the situation with Bobby. And again, he appreciates very much all of your collective concerns. So that's very good. Moving on from that, we move on to the BMW E9, and Stu has not been very well again. Stu is struggling with his back and his leg at the moment, and he's actually off work again today, so he's having a bit of a battle himself. So I've actually started picking up some of the work on this because obviously we need to get things progressing, and so I've actually started just to pick up some of the rear turret work. But Stu was in yesterday, and had got the closing panel made and welded in for the inner wheel arch on this side. He'd wheeled up that panel, got that trimmed in and got that all welded in yesterday. And as I say, in his absence, I've just picked up this job, done the cutout in that panel that he'd marked out, and I'm just doing the final bits of getting the alignment reasonably accurate for the turret that has to weld in to, if I put it the right way around, that welds into the inner wing there and welds into the parcel shelf, and that will carry the suspension loads into that inner arch panel that Stu's made. So I'm just getting those bits all sorted out and ready and lined up so that we can get those welded in. So that's the situation on the back of the E9, so inner wing and inner wheel arch and suspension turret progress. I'll be able to show you more next week. As I say, this week it's only really had sort of just over a day's work on it due to Stu not being too well. So yeah, that's pretty much wraps up where we're at in here. Body shop wise, Gaz is on holiday as well. So as I say, it's a bit of an empty ship at the moment here. So Gaz is off on his annual Scotland trip. So he's not here this week, but he'll be back next week. So there'll be more to see in there next week. And that brings me on to a little bit of footage that we shot the other day, which we thought you might be interested in, and fits in quite well because we've got a bit of a shorter episode than normal in terms of the metal shop. We thought we would just show you a bit of a staff project, and it's something that Matt is working on. It's quite exciting for him and us, and it's quite unusual, and we thought you might appreciate it. So as a little interlude before we hand over to Cal, I'm going to hand over to Matt and I in the engine room having a little look at something that Matt's working on. So I'll see you next week. Well, hello folks, a slightly different little bit of video here that we thought you might be interested in. We've got Matt here, Matt Sparrow from our fabrication shop, who's fairly camera shy and he's quite nervous about doing video. So you won't have seen him a lot on camera before, but you'll have seen a lot of his work, particularly at the moment on the Aston Martin DBS car that we're building. But there's obviously an elephant in the room here that Matt's quite proud of for multiple reasons, and we thought it might be interesting to you for a whole lot of reasons. This is quite an interesting engine, and this is one of Matt's many projects, but probably his main focus at the minute. And this is an engine that's going to be powering a van that he's rebuilding that's got quite a lot of history and quite a lot of sentimental value. So we'll have a little talk about it, and you'll learn a little bit about the background of one of our guys' projects. So it's what's the van, and what's the history of the van?
Well, it's a 1947 Morris Z van. It's based on the Series E saloon, but the van. They were built for the GPO and telecoms. Originally built with rubber wings and a 950cc engine. Yeah, there were wooden frame, ash frame.
Yeah, ash framed van.
Yeah,
little typical 40s construction utility vehicle. But you say it was your dad's van?
Yeah,
originally, wasn't it?
My dad bought it from a scrapyard in the 70s and decided he wanted to build a custom car, basically all British custom car, and yeah, the story goes from there really.
And this is the interesting. I mean, there's multiple things we'll touch on here, but the interesting bit there that fascinates me is this all British thing, because the hot rodding world in the USA, obviously, and particularly in the UK, is very USA driven, and most because the whole hot rodding really dates back to moonshine running, and the whole we never had prohibition in the UK, so we never really had the hot rodding. The start of hot rodding didn't really happen in the UK, partly because our automotive industry was a lot smaller, but also partly because we didn't have the prohibition, we didn't have the things that led up to the basis of hot rodding really, and we just didn't really get the big engines, we didn't have the cheap fuel, we just never had the groundwork that led to hot rodding in this country. But people like Matt's dad wanted to kind of do the UK take on that, and that fascinates me because I've had the same thought in the past, and now I just don't have the time to do it. but the all British thing is really quite important and very relevant to what we're stood in front of here. In that we didn't really have big capacity V8s in the UK. There were very, very few. There were quite a few big capacity straight engines, but not very many big capacity V engines, certainly not of British origin. But this is one of the few, and that's what makes it quite interesting. So what's this out of?
This is out of a Daimler Majestic Major. They were built between 62 and 68. This is a 4.5 litre HEMI V8. Originally produced in about 220, rated at 220.
Yeah, they generally made more.
Yeah, because it pretty much went off the scale. Yeah, and the blower on top's off a comma 2-stroke. It's a Wade 34, sorry. And obviously it's got a Elibrock American carb on, because there ain't really any other carburetors suitable for this engine, unless you go twin carbs.
And the quite interesting link there is that the engine being a 4.5, as far as I'm aware, I'll be corrected on this, but as far as I'm aware, in period at the time, that was the biggest capacity British made V8. I mean, there weren't really many others about at all, and I don't think the Aston Martin V8 existed at that point, certainly didn't at the beginning of that production period. So as far as I'm aware, that's the biggest capacity V8 you could buy in the UK at the time. I'll be corrected on that now, I'm sure. Obviously the Daimler 2.5 V8, quite a lot of those were sold, but the 4.5, as Matt said, they're very rare. They made, you said, about 2,000 of them. Yeah, they're a rare engine, and they made quite a lot of power. And they obviously had a clash because Jag bought Daimler, and Jag had the 4.2 straight 6. This was a direct competitor to that Jag engine. Jag were well tooled up to make the straight 6 engine. It didn't really fit in the lineup. It probably made a bit more power than the 4.2 straight 6. It didn't really fit in the lineup, so it just got binned. Hence it's a very rare engine. But the interesting bit is the whole parallel attack to it, compared to the American approach, is that in America, generally you would have a Chevy 350 V8, which would be obviously a bit more capacity, 5.7 litre versus 4.5, but similar thing, reasonable capacity, small block V8. Very commonplace in the States, and typically you would put, historically, you would put a blower that originated from a 2-stroke diesel in the States, from a Detroit diesel. So you would put either a V6 Detroit or a V8 Detroit blower on your Chevy 350, and then obviously the aftermarket came in, and there was lots of aftermarket versions of those superchargers, but they all originated, the principle originated from the Roots blowers that were on a Detroit diesel V6 or V8 diesel engine. And in the UK, again, much smaller market, we never really had that massive sort of widespread use of two-stroke diesels, but we did have a few. Obviously we had a few of the HGV manufacturers dabbled and dipped their toes into two-stroke diesels for a while, but probably one of the best known was the Comma TS3, and that's the blower from one of those. So it's kind of an interesting parallel. We've got the British two-stroke diesel supercharger on the British fairly large capacity V8, so it is a completely all British, give or take a carburettor. Basically it's an all British supercharged Hotrod V8 engine done in parallel with the kind of American take on those things, so it's quite an interesting thing. But there's a bit more history to the van, isn't there? Because your dad built the van, what did you say, 70?
70s.
Yeah.
Didn't really get round to driving it. Sold it when I was sold it in 1994.
So how old were you then?
Probably about 7 or 8.
Yeah. So you remember it being around, but not that clearly at that point.
Yeah.
And then did he buy it back, or did you buy it back?
I bought it back in 2010.
And when did your dad pass away?
9 years ago, so that was 2016.
Yeah. So Matt bought the van back prior to his dad passing away, but his dad's now sadly passed away. So the relevance of the project is much stronger than it could otherwise have been, in that this is pretty much a memorial to your dad.
Pretty much, yeah.
So there's obviously a lot of sentimental value in this, and it's basically building it back to how it was when his dad built it back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And it's been a battle, isn't it, hasn't it, on parts?
Yeah, just a bit. Everything's got to be specially made, or there's a company I've been dealing with and they've been really helpful. But it's really expensive.
Yeah,
expensive engine to build.
Trying to get any parts. Matt had a problem with the camshaft where you got some corrosion on the cam. You had a problem with the block for a start, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah, cracked block. This is the second block, and then had to have it all bored out and journals done and everything else. So,
to put it in perspective, Matt had to remove the pistons from this by cutting them out.
Yeah.
We tried dissolving the aluminium out with sodium hydroxide. We tried heat. We tried sledgehammers and wood. Nothing was getting those pistons out. He's ended up drilling through them and then cutting them out in pieces. He had to cut the cam out of the block in pieces to get the block back to sort of a bare block, and then it's been built up from that. And he's had a fair few spares, but then keep finding problems with spares, like camshafts with bits of corrosion on, getting a new cam, a replacement cam, even that had little bits of damage on, but much less. And
very expensive.
Yeah, very, very hard to get the bits because there's no aftermarket part support for these engines whatsoever. It's very hard just to even get service parts for them. So it's an uphill struggle. It'd be a lot easier to put a Chevy in, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I should have bought a crate motor.
But it wouldn't be the same, and it wouldn't be that all British hot rod, and it wouldn't be the car his dad built. So it's it's going to be quite a thing. So what have you got left to? At the moment, gearbox, isn't it?
Trying to work out gearbox options. There's torn between ZF.
Yeah, there's the ZF4 HP22, which a few people have fitted to these, but it won't really take it's not really got any margin for the power, really. I think it might hold, but it wouldn't be a 5-minute job to engineer it on, and I personally don't think it'll hold the power. The torque converter will certainly flag. I don't think that will hold it.
Yeah, there's a TH400 option as well.
Yeah, I think the TH400 is probably going to be the best option, because the original Borg Warner is quite difficult to get parts for.
Borg Warner DG250.
Yeah, they're hard to get parts for. So I think it's going to end up being TH400. And then you've got a fair bit of work. What's the axle? What axle is it?
Jag 420G IRS.
Right.
1930 Wolseley front axle.
Right.
With Jag XJS front disc and
Is that a beam? Is that a drop beam axle? Yeah.
4-bar links.
Yeah. So it's leading 4-bar on the front. Yeah, nice. Again, a very British take on a Model A. Basically, that is, isn't it? It's basically like a Model A axle. Yeah. So then you're onto the body, which is ash framed and a bit poorly here and there.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of ripping out all the ash frame, replacing it with metal and integrating roll cage further down to the front. It's only rear hoop at the moment. And then obviously it's got a bench seat in it, so I'll change the bench seat, put buckets in it.
You gonna make them?
What, the bucket?
Yeah.
No, I bought them.
Oh,
Already done that.
you're Mr. Bucket Seat.
They're already trimmed.
You've made enough of them.
They're easy. They're already trimmed, so yeah, I've got those. Yeah, it's just a case of metalwork after this.
Yeah,
get the trim first, get the bulkhead cut out, and
they're not the most rigid van, are they? That's the thing. They're wobbly box, basically. You know, they were designed to pootle about at 40 miles an hour flat out, really, weren't they?
Yeah.
And be disposable vans. You know, run a GPO engineer around the country in the 1940s. You know, and at 40 miles an hour if you're lucky, and putting what realistically is liable to be approaching 300 horsepower and quite a lot of torque is a big ask.
With the over in at the moment, it's not too bad.
Yeah,
but the body still flexes.
The chassis is braced, isn't it?
Yeah,
the chassis
box and brace chassis. Yeah.
Yeah.
The chassis is a Series E saloon chassis, all boxed and braced.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a thing. So hopefully, in future episodes, we'll be able to do a look at the actual van once Matt's got a bit further on with it. But we thought you'd like a bit of an insight into one of our guys' projects, and a rare sighting of Matt on camera to say hello and just look. It's a pretty impressive piece of engineering. It's a pretty impressive bit of kit, and Matt's rightly very proud of it. Very proud of the legacy to his dad, really, and also the actual taking on what is a pretty big and fairly daunting project of an engine build, where there's ready-made solutions are not forthcoming. So hope you like that little interlude and little insight into things behind the scenes, and we shall see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nat. I am going to add a second shot of espresso into my latte, Roundstone coffee. This is great, isn't it, starting in here? We haven't done this for ages. And actually this ties in quite nicely, because this feels a bit behind the scenes and it involves Roundstone coffee. I've got some very exciting news to talk about. We are launching a club, and that's something we've wanted to do for ages. Those who follow us on Instagram will probably already know this, because I unveiled it a few days ago. But we're launching a membership club. Memberships will open up in November, and the focus of the club is going to be encouraging like-minded people like us to get out there using their cars and socialise with like-minded people and visit interesting places across the UK. So we'll be doing road trips. Those road trips will frequently take in interesting automotive businesses around the UK, which we're very well connected with. We're going to do open days here and open days at the Den. Those we're asked about a lot, and those will be exclusively for club members. You won't be able to do an open day here unless you are a club member. Lots of experiences of that nature. We're going to do road trips into Europe, we're going to do motorsport events, we're going to do shows, we're going to try and do a really packed schedule of events. We're also going to have an online portal where you can log in and get a behind the scenes media feed that is a lot more kind of personal and informal than these videos, which are relatively informal anyway. This might be banter between the guys, it might be some random interesting technical information, but we're going to try and add photos and videos to it every day, so you have, as a club member, an exclusive little insight into life at Retropower. What else are we doing, Jamie? Magazine, absolutely awesome magazine. So I wanted to do a club magazine, and there's a lot of car clubs with a lot of frankly not very good magazines, so we wanted to do something that's spectacular, really nicely published, really nice material, great contributors to it. Jamie from behind the camera, whose history really is just doing written articles, journalism. He's going to be doing some amazing articles for it. I've got some other big names lined up to contribute to it. There'll be car features in there, there'll be sections about stuff going on in the workshop. It's just going to be something you'd be happy to have on your coffee table at home and read about what's going on at Retropower. And there's going to be an exclusive merch range. And perhaps most importantly to mention is that the first 100 members are going to automatically be entered into a higher loyalty tier.
It's going to be called the OG 100 for the first 100 members, and they will always have priority access to everything. You will always have an annual party. There will be a launch party for it in January, which is going to be exclusively for those first 100 members. You'll also get your own OG 100 merch as part of that. So the advice basically is keep in touch with our social media, particularly Instagram. And we will be announcing the date that membership will open up for you to be able to subscribe to it. We'll do a countdown probably on Instagram, and then as soon as that membership opens up, get on there. It's not expensive. Get signed up, and if you're in that first 100 members, you're in for something extremely special. And even if you miss that first 100 membership, it's going to be absolutely awesome. So can't wait to share with you what we've got in store for 2026. And on that note, let's go and see what's going on in the workshop.
We are rolling.
Ah, excellent. Well, you find, I'll tell you what I'm going to do here. I've noticed George has set me up a little fairground entertainment. You know those games where you have to pass the loop over the thing without the buzzer going off? That's what we've got. Oh, no. Oh,
Keep going.
Oh,
mate, that's it.
Oh, man. Thank you for that entertainment. That was very kind of you to set that up for me. Right, anyway, back to some degree of seriousness. Jensen Interceptor, which has, as you will see, the engine in. So earlier this week, engine and transmission finally mated up. They were putting the engine loom on last week, buttoned up the last of that. Then the very precarious operation of getting that in the car. Precarious because the engine is a long way back and the engine and transmission combo extremely heavy, and our engine crane, or most engine cranes, at the full extension required to get back that far are decidedly dubious with that much weight, shall we say. So what we decided to do was put this the wrong way around on the ramp on the basis that we weren't going to have to go very high with it, and bring the forklift in, then suitably lash that to the forklift, which actually in itself was a bit of a trauma because we had to take the inlet manifold off. We were worried about that getting snagged up with the straps. It's got 4 lifting points sort of on each end of the heads. But eventually we got there, got a nice setup, felt really confident with how it was on the forklift. Having it on the ramp meant we can get it up a little bit to get underneath to guide the transmission in, get the transmission cross member in, and all was well. So we now have a HEMI in an Interceptor, hopefully for the final time, which is very exciting. And they can now start populating the other bits of the engine bay. So I can see the air filter housing is now in place, and we'll start going through build-up of all of those parts which we mocked up during metalwork, which have all subsequently been surface finished, and everything can start going into place. So that is good. And on the subject of things going into place, the interior we have started to look at. So next on James's agenda is picking up where we were at with this. So actually the front and rear seats had been done previously when work had started on this car at another company. The seats were upholstered at that point, as were the door cards, but that was about it. So we're sort of picking up the pieces from there. The dash and console are a custom build now of ours, so we're in progress with making those parts, 3D printed sections for the centre console. And then the rest of it's kind of a combination of existing parts and bits that were in progress that hadn't quite been taken all the way through. So the cover sections for the rear arches here, they'd been constructed previously, but they weren't quite finished, and there was a few bits we're not happy with. So James is kind of going back and finessing those a bit and finishing the other side. There was a previous existing plan to have a cup holder and a phone holder and a USB socket, which we're scrapping that. So we're just doing some straightforward storage bins with folding lids on them. So a bit of construction work there. The central part is fiberglass between the 2 rear seats, and we'd previously tweaked that, got the width of it right, smoothed it all out. So that's ready to upholster. Parcel shelf section, we're trial fitting that, making sure that's all good, but we had that trial fitted during metalwork, and it still, it looks good as we hoped it would. Richard had previously done a trial section of leather on there, which is why it's got a random piece of leather on, because he was just seeing where the seam would sit nicely and how it would sit. So that can be taken off, but the proof of that trial came out very nicely. C-pillars are fiberglass panels, we've trialled them, they look good. All of the cant rails, I think they're called, that go around the roof, the sort of panelling, that's all fiberglass panels, which again, ready to upholster. The headlining had already been made. James has now stuck that in, so it's got a grey Alcantara headlining in there, and then it'll be black leather all bordering that. And then the door cards, although they were previously done, we've decided to do an edit on those after a bit of conflab with the customer we're building this for. They were originally completely upholstered in this kind of brown, slightly burgundy colour. I think it's called something plum, burnt plum. It's an old Muirhead colour, which is now obsolete actually, but thankfully we did actually receive enough of the Muirhead leather with this that I think we've got enough to do everything. But the door cards, they were all that colour, and we just thought it was a bit too much. So we're changing that and redoing the top section in black and redoing the armrest in black to break it up a little bit. Speaker breaks up the front, so that should be fine. We talked to the customer about maybe doing some vertical pleats to match those on the seats, but we've decided not to, and just to leave it kind of flat leather on the rest of it. And then there's going to be a load of construction to do in the boot, the side panelling that goes over the battery and the subwoofer in the boot. And then we were also discussing the rear parcel shelf area. So there's normally a flat board that goes in there, and originally the thinking was that was just going to be fitted as standard. However, talking to the customer recently about this, he's talking about doing a retractable load cover. So we're going to do a slight edit on that, and we're just trying to find, if anybody knows a car that has a very wide retractable load cover, I'm thinking probably something like a Volvo 960 or car from that era where they were very square and wide, because a lot of modern estates, they taper in a lot. So the actual, by the time you get to the load cover area, they're surprisingly narrow. But yeah, we're going to do a retractable cover for that, and then all of that framework around there gets foamed and leathered. So yeah, we're basically in a position to crack on with the interior upholstery on this, and hopefully Luke will be bashing on with the prints of the centre console, and then that can all tie together with James's progress on all the manually made bits. So I think that's about where we're at with Interceptor. I've got a visual cue here, and I'm going to briefly dwell on a car that's not in here, but the SL500 Mercedes that's down in the den. Awesome car. I really like that car. I don't know why. There's something about R107 SLs at the minute I love, and that colour combination. The gold is just so good. When we first received that, I was like, oh, I'm sure the guy in The Business, the film with Danny Dyer, the gangster guy in Spain that he goes to work for, drives one of those, and I had a quick look and he does. I love it. Anyway, Richard did a full interior in that. I think this was just about the time that James started with us. Incredible job of that. I love that sort of terracotta leather we've got in there. And at that point, we did talk about doing the lower dash and console, but at the time, it wasn't long until that customer wanted to use the car, so we decided to do it in 2 phases. So they did phase 1, which was door cards, all the rear trim panels and the seats. Phase 2 now is the dash, so James has been working on that, so completely disassembled all the dash. Done a really nice job of wrapping all that lower dash in leather. Some really tricky bits, so round recesses around where the headlight switch is. You've got to put seams in there, groove everything out to get the excess sitting in nicely. Done a superb job, and then where the console sort of extends back, got a feature stitch all the way along the top of that, which again sits so nicely. Brilliant job. And then we were thrown a little bit of a curveball in conversation with that customer. We were talking about the wood and the fact that now the console looks so good, the wood looks a little bit ropey, and we were saying, do you want it re-veneered? And the answer was actually no, can you do it in black leather, wrap it all in black leather? And I did suggest it might be easier to do like a nice satin lacquer over black paint on there, or even a dark wood. But he was holding firm on the leather, so we've got a bit of a challenge, and we like challenges. And the reason it's a challenge is because everything on these panels is in flush, rather than a lot of cars where anything that's clipped into a panel, like a switch, has got like a sort of bezel around it, and it clips in, but the bezel covers the very edge. Mercedes were trying to be super futuristic looking, I guess, at the time, and they've done everything absolutely flush with the edge, which is kind of making a rod for their own back, because it means wherever lacquer starts to peel from the edge, it looks a bit gnarly around the edge. However, it does mean for us that because all of these switches and panels were designed to sit in from the back completely flush, the leather also needs to sit completely flush, which means all of these holes have got to be whittled out, but there's no margin for error on them. They've got to be whittled out for the thickness of the leather, basically, to sit down there, but there's no margin for error. they have to be perfectly shaped because you still see that edge there. So essentially we've got to remake these panels. I think this one will probably laser cut out a new aluminium panel because it's only veneer bonded to aluminium anyway, with everything sized out by the sort of 0.7, 0.8 of a mil thickness of the leather. This one is solid wood, so it's slightly more of a challenge, but I think we're probably going to remake this in metal, again with everything just taken out slightly bigger to allow for the leather wrap round. And then there's a strip across the dash, there's various little bits that are wood on it, so we're now doing all of those in black leather. So random little challenge on that, but can't wait to see how that car's going to turn out. You'll see a bit more of that when we go down there in a sec. Moving on from that, Project Portofino. So can't remember whether the front cross member was actually in last week or not, or ready to go in, but either way, the front cross member's now in. Just been populating the front hubs with bearings so they can go on, and then we'll be ready to get the brakes on it. It's basically ready to be rolling at the front then. Working on the brake plumbing. So we had a bit of a conflab about the exact routing, because there were some areas of the brake plumbing which we hadn't set out the exact positions for when it was at metalwork. And we decided that actually if we switched to a left-hand drive master cylinder, which has the banjo or has the outlets on facing towards the centre of the car rather than towards the wing, it would allow that plumbing to be a little bit neater rather than it coming down the outside and under the master cylinder. It would come straight down and look very, very nice. So we decided to go with that. We're doing a left-hand drive master cylinder. That required us to just edit the bracket for the power steering fluid, because that was in the way of where those pipes are now being routed. But it's all in the interest of the greater good, because it is going to look absolutely stunning. That's actually what George is just working on now, shaping some of those ATEC hard lines. We've got a position now for where the T-pieces are going. We've got to run the front to rear line. I think, in fact, it might already be in, actually. Once that lot's in, then this can go in, and that's the last bit sort of to the back that needs access without this in. We've just finished building up the drive shafts for this, so the components of those shafts went away for zinc nickel plating. They've come back, they've been built up with new UJ bearings, and then just to keep the look looking a bit more in keeping, they've just had black direct paint. So when we talk about direct, it's a black polyurethane direct to metal paint that we use. So they've just been painted, so they're black, but even if that paint gets damaged, they're zinc nickel plated underneath as well, so good for corrosion resistance. They can go in here. The hub carriers are already over there. We saw them being put together last week, and that means this lot will be ready to go and go in the car. So that basically will mean it's ready, rolling at that point. And then meanwhile, Adam's on with engine stuff. So I showed the head being assembled such that we could measure the valve clearances to have the shims ground last week. Adam's finished that now. All the shims have gone away to be ground, so we should get them back very soon. As soon as they're back, we can finish building that up. Then the main bearings came through from Aston Martin. So the AJ16 engine, the bearings are quite hard to get, but it is the same engine in the Aston DV7, and Aston Martin do still have stock of main bearings. So they've arrived, they've gone in, he's just got the crank in there. Next thing is going to be double checking the clearances. So we've had the crank journals polished. I can't remember now. I have to actually watch my own video back to remember whether we ground them to a different size or not. I don't think we did. So we'll be using Plastigauge to check the clearances on that. Everything has been done to tolerance, but it's always worth that last double check. And Plastigauge is basically just some very accurately extruded squashy plastic material that you place onto the journal, torque down the bearing shell and the cap, and then take it back off again. And because it's a very precisely measured amount, according to how tightly squashed down it is, it will squish out to a set width, and then you basically have a gauge which shows you shows you the different widths it would squash to, and the bearing clearance that correlates to, if that makes any sense at all. So that's what we'll be doing next, to check all those clearances. I would imagine they're all going to be fine. Then we'll be able to torque all the main caps down, and then if we get the shims back for the head, rods and pistons will go in, and yeah, we'll be kind of on building that up, so we should see that next week. God, I've got a lot to remember today. Let me think. So that is it for that. Moving on to Project Churchill, very exciting. I think this was on Friday. We got back all of the parts from copper plating, which look absolutely stunning. So, as always, Derby Plating have done an amazing job. Downside is that any other customers of theirs will probably already know this, that Derby Plating is closing their doors, which is going to be a bit of a kick in the teeth for us, really, because it took us a long while to find someone that we were confident we could continuously trust to do the same amazing quality. So yes, we'll be on the search for a new supplier for doing chrome and in this case polished copper. But yes, they've done an amazing job. It's batch 1 of 2. Thankfully, batch 1 is basically all the exterior stuff. We were a little bit concerned that given that we're losing their services, we might have another supplier and the exact finish of the copper might be slightly different. However, there's nowhere on the car where we're going to have something from batch 1 and something from batch 2 directly next to each other, so we should be fine on that. But before that stuff starts to go on the car, we are looking at coating. So obviously that polished copper finish looks absolutely amazing, but copper tarnishes very quickly out in the elements. It goes like a greeny colour. If you've ever seen those buildings that have green roofs, that is because they're copper, and that's the sort of corrosion effect you get. Same on copper coins, of course. So we're kind of being very careful about the coatings that we want to use on this. We'd like to coat it all, clear coat it all, but the problem is if you chip like a traditional 2-pack clear coat and we start to get corrosion creeping underneath, a bit like when you have alloy wheels that get corrosion spidering underneath. We don't want that, of course, but at the same time I don't really want to have to be continuously polishing the copper, or having the customer having to continuously polish the copper to keep it good. And also there are areas like the door frame, the lower door frames for instance, where you won't be able to get to them once the car's assembled, so you wouldn't be able to polish the corrosion off. So we sort of whittled it down to using a Cerakote or a traditional kind of detailer's ceramic coating, and we're just doing some tests. So we had a load of little placards copper plated. Now I put 3 of them on the roof of the canteen, left them open in the elements. I gave them a bit of a head start with some bleach spray and some salt on them, and then I've left them outside. And I have to say, early indications, I was reasonably hopeful that the detailer's ceramic coating wouldn't just be snake oil. But the early indications are not promising in that respect, because there's almost no perceivable difference between the one that's been ceramic coated and the one that's got no coating on at all. Now the Cerakote one is, as you'd expect, absolutely spot on. However, we did struggle to get the Cerakote to go on perfectly. That said, the Cerakote we've used is one that we use on our Bead Blasters aluminium castings, and they actually do one that's specifically for polished metal finishes. So we're going to get a sample of that, try that one, see if we can get it to go on nicer. Essentially the problem seems to be some polishing soap being kind of stuck in the pores of the material, and it just kind of giving you little fish eyes in the finish. So watch this space on that. Worst case scenario is we just have to get the customer to polish the copper a lot, but we're hoping to get a Cerakote finish that's difficult to damage, goes on really nicely, doesn't affect the look of the polished finish, but does stop it corroding. So watch this space on that, really interesting experiment. Other bits on that, we're really just carrying on 3D printing sections. So all the sections for the offside door are done, and the console parts are being printed at the minute. So James will be able to get on with finishing the door card and the centre console leathering. And also Luke's been working on the final surfacing and prototyping of all of the surround pieces that run around the inside of the roof. They're looking pretty promising, so once he's done his final checks on that, we have a decision to make on how we're making those, because they're actually quite flat, and rather than having lots of sections, all 3D printed sections joined, because the long ones are really long, and the risk of there being slight waves in the length of that due to the joins in the 3D print. So we're thinking about machining a female tool in epoxy tooling board and laying those up in fiberglass. So we'll have a small 3D printed section where the C-pillar is, and then the rest will be fiberglass sections. So over the rear screen, down the sides, over the front screen. And then they'll be wrapped in the same blue leather that's elsewhere in that. So watch this space on that also. I think, on that note, we're going to end it, and we are dropping, as usual, the Dens video right now, so you can see what Luke and Nick have been up to down at the Den. But from me, that's all, and we'll see you again next week.